I never thought a piece of paper could ruin my whole morning. But there it was, stuck right in the middle of my windshield like a neon orange slap to the face. Now I'm used to seeing tickets. Comes with the job, but not on my own patrol truck, and definitely not while it's sitting in my own driveway. That morning had started like any other. Sun creeping through the blinds, the faint hum of sprinklers, and me trying to catch up on sleep after a 16-hour shift at the sheriff's office. I'd rolled in around dawn, parked my county-issued truck in its usual spot, and dragged myself inside for a shower and a few hours of peace. But when I stepped outside around 10, coffee in hand, the first thing I saw was that bright orange notice flapping against the windshield. I froze for a second, thinking maybe one of my buddies was playing a prank. Then I read it. Violation of HOA Code 3B. Commercial vehicle parking prohibited in residential driveways. I actually laughed out loud. Commercial vehicle? That was a law enforcement vehicle, a marked patrol unit from the county sheriff's office. It was like calling an ambulance a delivery van. I crumpled the ticket and shook my head, thinking maybe it was a mistake. That's when I heard the sound of sandals scraping on concrete. Across the street, standing with her arms crossed and her jaw tight enough to break a tooth, was Karen, president of the Maple Glen Homeowners Association. Every neighborhood's got one. Ours came with a clipboard, a radio, and enough authority issues to fill a textbook. She called out, "Deputy Carter, you can't park that thing here. It violates community standards." I turned toward her, still half asleep, still half convinced this was a dream. "Morning, Karen. You know that thing is a patrol vehicle, right?" Her face didn't even twitch. "Doesn't matter. It's a commercial vehicle. The rules are clear. No commercial, construction, or service vehicles in residential driveways. You can park it at the station." I took a long sip of coffee. "Karen, I am the station." For a second, I thought she might laugh. Instead, she pulled out her clipboard and scribbled something down. "Rules apply to everyone," she said flatly, "even law enforcement." Then she turned and strutted away, leaving me standing there wondering what alternate universe I'd just woken up in. You'd think that'd be the end of it. I sure did. I even brushed it off later that day when I told my neighbor, Tom, what happened. He just shook his head and said, "Man, you don't want to mess with her. Last month she fined me for having the wrong color mulch." I chuckled, figuring this was just another one of her control trips. But the next morning, I realized she wasn't bluffing. A white envelope sat wedged in my front door. "Notice of violation," printed across the top in bold letters. Same code, same nonsense. Except this time it came with a warning: failure to comply will result in escalation. Escalation. She actually wrote that like she was in a spy movie. Now I've dealt with real criminals, the kind who don't care about laws or lines or lives. So the idea that a suburban HOA president thought she could escalate against a deputy sheriff was almost funny. Almost. I figured I'd clear it up the professional way. I called the number on the letter, got the HOA office voicemail, and left a polite message explaining the situation. I said, "This is Deputy James Carter with the County Sheriff's Department. I think there's been a misunderstanding regarding my patrol vehicle. Please call me back." No response. 2 hours later, I looked out the window and saw her again. Karen, standing at the end of my driveway with 2 other board members, measuring tape stretched across the concrete like they were investigating a crime scene. One of them pointed at my patrol truck. The other wrote something on a clipboard. I stepped outside and said, "Everything okay, folks?" Karen didn't even look at me. "Routine inspection," she said curtly. "Inspection for what?" "Compliance." That's when I noticed one of the board members snapping photos. I couldn't help but grin. "If you're going to take pictures, make sure you get my good side," I said. They didn't laugh. They finished measuring, whispered among themselves, and walked off like a team of detectives solving the case of the dangerous driveway. That night I told myself I'd let it go. But deep down I knew better. People like Karen don't stop when they're wrong. They double down. Sure enough, the next morning I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a call from dispatch. The operator sounded half amused, half confused. "Hey, Carter, you're not gonna believe this," she said. "We just got a call from your HOA reporting an abandoned police vehicle in your neighborhood. They said it's been sitting there for days." I stared out the window at my truck, parked exactly where I'd left it, badge emblem shining in the sun. I said, "You're kidding me." "Nope," caller said the owner's impersonating law enforcement. I laughed, not the good kind of laugh, the kind that comes when you're one step away from losing your mind. Because in that moment I realized something. This wasn't about a truck or a rule or a misunderstanding. This was personal. And if Karen wanted a fight, she just picked the wrong driveway. The next morning, I woke up to find 3 HOA board members standing near my driveway, like they were performing a stakeout. Clipboards in hand, measuring tape dangling. One of them even had a camera snapping photos of my patrol truck from every possible angle. I opened my curtains and just watched for a minute, trying to decide whether to laugh or scream. You'd think they were documenting evidence for a federal case, not an HOA violation about where I parked. Finally, I stepped outside, still in my undershirt, coffee in hand, trying to play it cool. "Morning," I said. "You folks doing a documentary or something?" Karen turned toward me slowly, her lips pursed tight enough to cut glass. "We're documenting a recurring violation," she said. I took a sip of coffee. "Oh, you mean my county-issued patrol truck, the one I drive to keep people safe, that one." Her expression didn't change. "We've already filed a report. You'll be hearing from us soon." She said it like she was sending me to the principal's office. The other 2 board members just stood there awkwardly, clearly realizing this was getting out of hand, but too scared to challenge her. When they finally left, I figured maybe that would be the end of it, but that hope lasted about 4 hours. At around noon, my phone rang. I saw the caller ID County Dispatch. I answered, thinking maybe there was an update on a case. Instead, the operator said, "Hey, Carter, did you park your patrol truck at your house today?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" She hesitated. "We got a call from someone in your neighborhood reporting an abandoned law enforcement vehicle. They gave your address." I blinked. "You're joking." "Nope." Caller said it's been sitting there for days, and they think someone might be impersonating an officer. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring at the wall. Then I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind you make when you realize common sense has officially left the planet. I said, "Let me guess, caller didn't leave a name." "Anonymous," she said, but her tone told me she didn't need to. We both knew exactly who it was. When I hung up, I couldn't even be mad, not yet. I was mostly impressed. Karen had actually called the sheriff's department to report one of their own deputies. Now that takes commitment and delusion. That evening I drove to the HOA office to try and settle things face to face. The place was just a little converted room in the community clubhouse, folding chairs, cheap carpet, and a bulletin board with rules pinned everywhere. Karen sat behind a table, tapping away on a laptop like she was running the Pentagon. When I walked in, her fingers froze mid-typing. She looked up and her fake smile clicked into place like it had been rehearsed. "Deputy Carter, what brings you in today?" I smiled back, all polite. "Karen, I just got word that someone from this HOA reported my vehicle as abandoned. I wanted to clear that up." She leaned back, arms crossed. "We did. The board has a duty to report suspicious or non-compliant activity, and a marked government vehicle in a residential zone qualifies." "Suspicious activity," I repeated, trying not to laugh. "Karen, that truck is literally how I respond to suspicious activity." She tilted her head. "We all have our roles, deputy. You keep the streets safe, and I keep the neighborhood in order." That's when I realized I was talking to someone who didn't see me as a law enforcement officer. She saw me as a threat to her authority. I said, "There's no rule against a patrol vehicle being parked at a residence, if you check state code." She cut me off. "Our rules supersede that within HOA jurisdiction." That one made me smile, not a happy smile, the kind that says, "You're digging your own grave." "Karen," I said slowly, "HOAs can enforce bylaws, not laws, And calling 911 to report a police vehicle isn't just a bad look. It's filing a false report. For the first time, she blinked, just a little crack in that smug composure. "I didn't call the police," she said quickly. "Funny," I said, "because dispatch has your name in the system." Her eyes flickered. She turned back to her laptop. "I have a meeting, Deputy. We're done here." I stood there for a second, watching her pretend to type. The room felt like it was humming, like static before a storm. I finally said, "You're making this a whole lot harder than it needs to be." She didn't look up. Rules are rules. So I left, but I knew deep down she wasn't finished. People like her never stop when they think they've found a hill to die on. Sure enough, that night, I caught the flash of a camera through my blinds. Someone had taken a picture of my patrol truck under the porch light. Probably Karen again, building her case. I grabbed my phone and snapped a photo of my own, her reflection in the window, camera in hand. That was the moment I stopped trying to reason with her. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a battle. And I just decided to play it her way. By the time the weekend rolled around, I started to think maybe Karen had finally gotten bored. The neighborhood felt calm again. No new tickets, no calls from dispatch, no suspicious measuring happening outside my driveway. For a moment, I actually let myself believe it was over. Then Sunday morning hit. I was halfway through frying some eggs when I heard the sound of something sliding against my front door. When I opened it, there it was, another envelope. White, crisp, and stamped with the Maple Glen HOA logo. My stomach sank before I even tore it open. Inside was a printed notice, this time a lot more formal than the last one. It read, "Notice of violation, continued parking of unauthorized vehicle. Immediate compliance required within 72 hours or legal action will be pursued under HOA Bylaw Section 3B. Legal action, that was a new one. I stared at the paper for a while, my eggs burning on the stove behind me. The words swam in my head. Legal action over parking in my own driveway. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or throw something. I took a deep breath and decided to play it the civil way one last time. I went inside, grabbed my phone, and called the HOA office. The line rang and rang before clicking over to voicemail. "Hi, this is Deputy James Carter with the County Sheriff's Office," I said evenly. "I've received another violation notice regarding my patrol vehicle. This is a legal, county-issued vehicle, registered to my name and approved for residential parking. Please return my call before further action is taken." Click message sent. For about 2 hours I waited. No reply, no email, no knock at the door, just silence. Then around 3 in the afternoon I caught movement through my front window. Karen, again, except this time she wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members trailed behind her, both clutching clipboards like they were about to conduct a military inspection. Karen herself had a small tape measure dangling from her wrist and a smug little grin on her face. I watched as she walked straight onto my driveway and started measuring the space between my truck and the sidewalk. She wrote something down, then stepped onto my lawn. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I opened my door and stepped outside, keeping my voice calm. "Afternoon, folks. Everything okay out here?" Karen barely looked at me. "Routine inspection." "For what?" I asked. "Compliance," she said, snapping the tape measure back into place. I walked closer, resting my hands on my belt. "You know you're trespassing right now, don't you?" She laughed under her breath. "You can't trespass on a property governed by the HOA." "Actually, you can," I said. "And since this is my property, I suggest you step off before I file my own report." That got her attention. She straightened up, glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Are you threatening me, Deputy?" "No," I said. "I'm warning you." We stood there for a few seconds, neither of us moving. The other 2 board members shuffled nervously behind her, clearly realizing they'd signed up for the wrong kind of field trip. Finally, she gave a stiff little smile and turned away. As they walked off, I pulled out my phone and hit record. The footage showed her stepping over the boundary of my driveway, tape measure in hand. It might not have meant much now, but I had a feeling I'd need that clip soon. That night, I sent an email to the HOA board. I attached a photo of my vehicle registration, my county authorization, and a polite but firm explanation of my rights. No response. By Monday, another notice appeared, same tone, same threat, only this time it included a fine. $200. That's when I stopped playing nice. I printed out every notice, every voicemail log, and every photo I'd taken since this nonsense began. I slid it all into a manila folder labeled Evidence. If Karen wanted to play hardball, I was ready. That evening, I went for a walk to cool off. The sun was setting, painting the neighborhood gold. Sprinklers hissed across manicured lawns. Kids rode bikes down the street. Everything looked peaceful except for one thing. Karen was standing at the end of the cul-de-sac, talking to one of my neighbors. Her voice carried across the quiet air. "He's abusing his position," she was saying. "He thinks because he's a deputy he can break the rules. That truck's a safety risk and I won't let it slide." The neighbor saw me and quickly turned away. Karen just smiled, waved like nothing happened, and strolled back to her house. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just turned and walked home, heart-pounding with a mix of anger and disbelief. She wasn't going to stop until she made me the villain of her story. But what she didn't know was that I was already gathering everything I needed to turn the tables. The next HOA meeting was coming up in a few days, and I planned to be there, front row, calm as ever. Because if she wanted a war over my driveway, then it was time she learned what happens when you pick a fight with someone who carries both a badge and a very long memory. The day of the HOA meeting finally arrived. I'd spent the morning reviewing every bit of evidence I had, photos, notices, voice messages, and that recording of Karen stepping onto my driveway like she owned it. Everything was neatly organized in my folder, ready to go. I wasn't planning to make a scene, but I was ready if she pushed me. The meeting was set up in the community clubhouse, the kind of place that smells faintly like coffee and old carpet. Folding chairs lined up in rows, a long table up front for the board, and a few dozen residents scattered around, whispering like they were waiting for a show to start. Karen sat right in the middle of the front table, name tag shining under the fluorescent lights. She gave me a tight smile as I walked in, the kind that said she already thought she'd won. "Deputy Carter," she said sweetly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So glad you could make it. We were just discussing your situation." I gave a nod and took a seat in the second row. Wouldn't miss it. She shuffled her papers dramatically, tapping her pen against the table. "We've received multiple complaints about a government vehicle parked overnight in a residential driveway, in violation of our bylaws." I raised a hand. "You mean my patrol truck?" "That's correct," she said. "And while we appreciate your service, this community has standards that apply to everyone equally." I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. "You do realize that vehicle is registered under the county and falls under state exemption, right? It's not a private commercial vehicle. I have authorization to park it on any residential property in the jurisdiction." A few people murmured in the back. Karen's smile faltered for just a second. She leaned forward. "Even so, the board voted that it creates a visual disturbance." "A visual disturbance," I repeated, "because you don't like how it looks." Her voice sharpened, "Because it violates the neighborhood aesthetic." The words hung in the air, ridiculous and fragile. I almost laughed, but instead I opened my folder and laid out the stack of papers on the nearest table. "These are your notices, the fines, the emails you ignored, and a video of you trespassing on my property with 2 board members. I'd say that's a bigger violation than parking a truck." The room went quiet. One of the other board members, a tall guy named Rick, shifted uncomfortably. "Karen, maybe we should." But before he could finish, Karen snapped, "We're done here." She stood up, face flushed. "You're dismissed, deputy." I tilted my head. "That's not how this works. I'm a homeowner, same as you. And for the record, if you keep harassing me, I'll be filing an official complaint with the county." Karen's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she'd explode. Instead, she gathered her papers, turned sharply, and walked out of the clubhouse without another word. Everyone else started whispering. I picked up my folder, gave a small nod to the board, and left. It felt like a win, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. When I got home, the sun was dipping low, painting the street in orange light. I parked my truck exactly where it always sat, climbed the porch steps, and let out a long breath. Maybe now she'd finally back off. But about an hour later, just as I sat down to dinner, I heard the sound of sirens. At first, I thought they were heading somewhere else, until the flashing red and blue lights reflected through my living room window. I stepped outside to see 2 squad cars parked at the curb, lights flashing. One of the officers, a rookie I'd trained a few months back, looked at me with wide eyes. Hey, deputy," he said awkwardly. "We got a call from the HOA, something about a resident refusing to comply with neighborhood rules and threatening the board president." I blinked. "You're kidding." He shook his head. Dispatch said it came through as a possible disturbance. And there she was. Karen stood at the end of my driveway, arms folded, a triumphant smile plastered across her face. "That's him," she said. "He threatened me at the meeting and he's illegally parked again." I took a deep breath and stepped toward the officers. "Gentlemen, this is my HOA president, and this," I gestured to my truck, "is my legally parked, county-issued patrol vehicle. I have full authorization to have it here." The rookie nodded quickly. "Yeah, I know that, sir. We just have to document the call." Karen scoffed. "You can't just take his side because he's one of you." The second officer, an older sergeant, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're not taking sides. We're here because you called 911. Unless there's an emergency, this isn't a police matter." That wiped the smugness right off her face. "It is an emergency. He's abusing power." The sergeant looked at her deadpan. "Ma'am, calling 911 for a non-emergency is a misuse of emergency services. You could be fined." Karen froze. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She glanced at me, realizing she might have just made a huge mistake. I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch. Finally, the sergeant turned to me. "Sorry for the trouble, deputy. We'll make a note and clear the call." "No problem," I said evenly. "Appreciate it." They drove off, leaving Karen standing in the middle of the street, humiliated and fuming. She didn't say a word as she turned and stomped back to her house. I went inside, locked my door, and sat down at the table, heart still pounding. She'd actually called the cops on a cop. And if that wasn't the craziest part of the night, it was that I had a feeling she was just getting started. The morning after the police incident, the neighborhood felt different. People were avoiding eye contact, walking their dogs a little faster, pretending they hadn't seen the flashing lights the night before. Word had spread fast. Karen called 911 on the deputy who lived down the street. I was sipping coffee on my porch when my neighbor, Jeff, walked by. He gave me a half grin and said, "Heard the HOA had a real emergency last night. Too much law enforcement in one driveway." I chuckled, but inside I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her never stop when they're embarrassed. They double down, and I didn't have to wait long to find out what her next move was. By noon, I got a call from my supervisor at the sheriff's office. "Hey, Carter," he said. "We just got a complaint from your HOA, claims of misconduct, intimidation, and misuse of authority." I nearly dropped my coffee. "You're kidding." He sighed. "I wish I was, but don't worry. We know what this is. Just keep everything documented. We'll handle it formally." "Copy that," I said, though my stomach was in knots. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, disbelief mixing with anger. She'd actually filed a formal complaint with my department. She wasn't just trying to find me, she was trying to ruin my career. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Internal Affairs, attaching everything I had, every photo, video, voicemail, and the 911 call report. I kept it professional, but I made sure the truth was clear. This wasn't about rules. It was about harassment. Then I waited. 2 days passed quietly, which was strange. No new notices, no HOA visits, no phone calls. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe she'd realized she'd crossed a line. But on the third morning, I got another letter, this one not from the HOA, but from the County Code Enforcement Office. Apparently, someone had filed a community complaint, claiming I was operating a commercial business from home and using government equipment improperly. I didn't even have to check the sender to know who it was. That afternoon, a code officer showed up at my door. He was a tall, polite guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Hey, Deputy Carter," he said, hat in hand. "Sorry to bother you. Got a complaint we're required to follow up on." "Let me guess," I said. "Commercial business, county vehicle, parking violations." He blinked. "Yeah, how'd you know?" I smiled and handed him my documentation folder. "Because this has been going on for weeks. You can find the full story right here." He flipped through a few pages, then let out a low whistle. "Wow, she really went all in, huh?" "You have no idea," I said. He nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, everything checks out. You're good to go. I'll file this as a resolved case. Sorry for the trouble." "No problem," I said. "You're just doing your job." He left, but I knew word would get back to Karen that her latest plan had failed. I half expected her to show up that night, demanding an explanation, but she didn't. Instead, she tried something else, and this time it involved dragging the whole neighborhood into it. The next day, flyers appeared on every mailbox. They were printed in bold red letters and titled Community Safety Alert. According to the flyer, a resident was using his position in law enforcement to intimidate and disregard HOA regulations, creating an unsafe and hostile environment. There was no name on it, but she didn't need one. Everyone knew who it was about. When I saw it, I felt that familiar burn in my chest, the kind that comes right before you either lose your cool or channel it into something productive. I chose the latter. That evening, I called my supervisor again. "Sir, it's escalating," I said. "She's distributing false information to the entire community." He paused. "All right, Carter, time to end this." He told me to be home the next evening. County legal and a representative from the sheriff's office were going to pay the HOA a visit, official, on the record, and in person. I didn't know exactly what they had planned, but I had a good feeling it was going to make for one unforgettable meeting. When the next evening came, I saw 3 county vehicles pull up to the clubhouse, one from legal, one from the sheriff's office, and one unmarked. Karen and her board members were already inside, looking smug and self-assured, probably thinking they'd finally forced me into submission. I walked in behind the officials, calm and silent. Karen's face went pale when she saw who was with them. The county rep cleared his throat. "Good evening, everyone. We're here to discuss several complaints made against Deputy James Carter." He flipped open a folder, looked at Karen, and said flatly, "After reviewing all submitted evidence, it appears the complaints were false, misleading, and targeted." Karen blinked rapidly. "That's not true. I was protecting the neighborhood." The sheriff's rep stepped forward. "Ma'am, you filed a 911 call under false pretenses, made a written complaint to this department, and distributed defamatory materials. Those are serious offenses." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the old ceiling fan spinning lazily above us. Karen stammered, "I didn't mean." But before she could finish, the county rep handed her a citation. "You're being fined for misuse of emergency services and defamation. You'll also be required to attend a hearing regarding your conduct as HOA president." Her jaw dropped. "You can't do this." The sheriff's rep looked at her evenly. "Ma'am, we just did." I didn't say a word. I just watched, calm and quiet, as her entire power trip collapsed in front of the people she'd tried to impress. For the first time since this whole mess began, I actually felt like justice was catching up to her. But I had no idea the real twist was still coming. The meeting ended in total silence. You could have heard a pin drop as the officials walked out of the clubhouse, leaving Karen standing there with a citation in one hand and her pride crumbling in the other. A few board members whispered something to her, but she just waved them off, face red and trembling. I gathered my papers, nodded to the county reps, and walked out behind them. I didn't gloat, didn't say a word. The silence was satisfaction enough. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People who used to avoid me were suddenly friendly again. Some waved from their driveways, others gave awkward smiles, pretending they hadn't sided with Karen before. Word had spread fast. The HOA president had been fined, investigated, and officially reprimanded. But the funny thing about power is that once a crack shows, everything starts to fall apart. 2 days later, I got an email from one of the board members, Rick, the same guy who tried to calm Karen down at the earlier meeting. He asked if I could meet him at the local diner, said it was important. When I got there, he looked nervous, glancing around before sliding into the booth across from me. "Listen," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. Things got out of hand. Karen's been running this HOA like her personal kingdom for years. People are scared to stand up to her." I sipped my coffee, studying him. What changed? He sighed. After that county meeting, people started asking questions. Turns out some of the HOA's spending doesn't add up. Missing funds, inflated invoices, fake landscaping projects, all under her signature. I leaned back, surprised but not shocked. "You're saying she's been stealing?" Rick nodded grimly. "Looks that way, and now with her in trouble, folks are starting to talk." I didn't say much. Just listened as he explained how Karen had bullied her way into every decision, silenced any opposition, and kept records that nobody else could access. But now that her reputation was tarnished, those same people were digging through the books, and the skeletons were starting to tumble out. By that weekend, things hit a breaking point. The HOA called an emergency meeting, and this time the clubhouse was packed. Nearly every homeowner showed up. You could feel the tension the second you walked in, whispers, folded arms, the kind of energy that said people were ready for a showdown. Karen walked in 10 minutes late, looking pale but defiant. She sat at the head table, pretending not to notice the glares being thrown her way. The moment she started talking, the room erupted. "You misused our dues, Karen," someone shouted. "You fined us for trash cans but spent thousands on decorative mulch that never showed up," another yelled. Karen slammed her hand on the table. "Enough, you don't know what you're talking about." Rick stood up from the crowd, holding a binder. "Actually, we do. These are copies of the financial records you signed. You authorized payments to a company that doesn't exist, and the checks went to your personal account." The room went dead quiet. Karen froze. I sat in the back, arms crossed, just watching it all unfold. There was no satisfaction in it, not really, just a strange mix of disbelief and inevitability. She stammered, "Those were reimbursements. I paid out of pocket." Rick shook his head. "That's not what the bank says." Someone shouted, "You need to step down, Karen." And then another joined in. Within moments, the room became a wave of angry voices demanding her resignation. Karen's face twisted with anger and panic. "You can't do this to me. I built this community." Rick looked around, then back at her. "No, Karen, you controlled it. There's a difference." He turned to the crowd, all in favor of removing Karen Thompson as HOA president. Every hand in the room went up, every single one. Karen looked around, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're all making a mistake," she whispered, voice cracking. Then, clutching her purse, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room stayed silent for a long moment, and then people started clapping. Some laughed, some cried, and a few just stood there, dazed. Rick turned to me afterward. "You started this, you know," he said quietly. "If you hadn't stood up to her, no one would have dared." I shook my head. All I did was park my truck. He smiled. "Sometimes that's all it takes." That night, the neighborhood felt lighter. No letters on doors, no suspicious measuring tapes, no angry emails. Just peace, the kind that had been missing for months. But even as I sat on my porch, enjoying the quiet, I had a feeling Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't just disappear. They wait, they plot, and they come back swinging. And as fate would have it, I was right. Because a week later, I got a call from a county investigator, and what he told me made my blood run cold. The call came early in the morning. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Deputy Carter?" a man's voice asked. "This is Investigator Paul Rieneur with the county's Financial Crimes Division. Do you have a minute?" My grip on the mug tightened. "Yes, sir, what's this about?" He paused before saying, "It's regarding your HOA, specifically former President Karen Thompson. We've received multiple complaints from homeowners, and well, some new evidence has surfaced. We understand you were directly involved in prior incidents with her." I sat back, heart thudding. "That's right. What kind of evidence are we talking about?" He hesitated, then said, "Enough to warrant a deeper look. Would you mind stopping by the county office later today? I think you'll want to see this in person." A few hours later, I found myself walking into the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of the county investigator. Rieneur was a tall guy in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of weary patience that comes from years of chasing liars. He greeted me with a nod and gestured toward a file spread out across his desk. "She covered her tracks well," he said, flipping open a folder, "but not well enough. After the HOA meeting where she was removed, a board member turned over access to the HOA's digital accounts. We found transfers, small ones at first, then larger. Over $30,000 in dues redirected into personal accounts, all tied to fake invoices." He turned a page and pointed at a printed bank statement. My eyes caught the dates. They went back nearly 2 years. "2 years?" I asked. He nodded. "She's been doing this long before your truck ever became an issue." I exhaled slowly, realizing my run-ins with her had just been a symptom of something much bigger. She wasn't obsessed with rules, she was obsessed with control. And anyone who questioned her authority was a threat to her empire. Rieneur leaned back. "Now here, where it gets tricky. We found a few questionable entries that suggest she may have tried to erase digital records last week, using someone else's login credentials." I frowned. "Someone else from the HOA?" He nodded. "Rick, the same guy who's been helping the investigation, but he's claiming his credentials were stolen." The air in the room felt heavier. Karen was out, officially disgraced, but somehow she was still trying to manipulate things behind the scenes. "Do you know where she is now?" I asked. "Last known address is still her house in Maple Glen," Rieneur said. "But she's been dodging calls and hasn't shown up for her mandatory hearing. If she doesn't show by Friday, we'll have to move forward with a warrant." When I left the office, I couldn't shake the unease sitting in my gut. Karen might have lost her title, but she wasn't the type to walk away quietly. She was desperate now, and desperate people make bad choices. That night I came home late after a long shift. The street was quiet, the kind of calm that feels staged. My house sat in soft shadows, porch light glowing faintly. I parked the patrol truck in its usual spot, grabbed my duffel, and started up the walk. That's when I noticed it, a faint glint near my front door. As I got closer, I saw it was a small flash drive taped to the handle. No note, no markings, just a USB drive. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, but curiosity won. I grabbed it, went inside, and plugged it into my old laptop, one that wasn't connected to the department network. The drive contained a single folder labeled HOA Records. Inside were dozens of scanned documents, transaction histories, and even email exchanges. Most of them matched what Rieneur had already shown me, except for one file buried at the bottom. It was a recorded audio clip, time-stamped just a few days earlier. I hit play. Karen's voice filled the room. "No one's going to pin this on me. They think they've won, but I have everything backed up. If they push me, I'll take everyone down with me, even him." The him hung in the air. I replayed it twice, realizing what she meant. She was threatening to drag me into her mess, to make it look like I'd helped her, maybe even forged records as a cop. It all clicked then. The complaints, the setup, the sudden disappearance. She wasn't hiding, she was preparing a counterattack. Before I could even decide what to do next, my phone buzzed again. It was Rieneur. "Carter," he said, his voice tense. "You at home right now?" Yeah, why? We just traced a digital login to the HOA's system. It came from your IP address 30 minutes ago. I froze. That's impossible. I haven't. Then I looked down at the flash drive on my desk, realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. She planted it. Rionur, I said, heart pounding. She's setting me up. He didn't waste time. Unplug everything. We're on our way. Within the hour, 2 unmarked county vehicles pulled up to my house. I handed over the drive and explained everything. They secured it, verified my logs, and left promising to trace its origin. As the taillights disappeared down the road, I stood there on my porch, staring into the dark street. Somewhere out there, Karen was still pulling strings. And now she wasn't just breaking HOA rules, she was committing federal crimes. The fight wasn't over. It was about to go a whole lot deeper. 2 days passed without a word from Rionur or anyone from the county office. Each hour felt like an eternity. I didn't sleep much. Every sound outside made me tense up. I kept thinking about that flash drive, about how she'd managed to plant it without me noticing. Karen wasn't just vindictive, she was methodical. She knew how to twist perception, how to turn neighbors against neighbors. And now she was aiming for something bigger to destroy me. On the 3rd morning, I was sitting on the porch steps with a mug of coffee gone cold when I saw a black SUV crawl past my house. It wasn't one I recognized. It didn't have plates from around here either. I watched it roll to the end of the street, pause, then turn back and stop near my driveway. A woman stepped out, sunglasses, long coat, hair tied tight. For a split second, I thought it was Karen, but no. This woman was younger. She approached slowly, holding up a badge. "Deputy Carter," she asked. "Yeah, who's asking?" "Special Agent Brooke Hanley, Federal Cybercrimes Unit. We're working with Investigator Rionur. We traced the device you turned in. Mind if I come in?" Inside, she spread out her files across my kitchen table. There were photos, screenshots, timestamps. Every detail was laid out like a map of deceit. "We found traces of remote access coming from an encrypted connection in the last 48 hours, she said. "The flash drive was a decoy. Once you plugged it in, it pinged your IP address just long enough for someone to spoof activity under your name." I leaned forward, "And I'm guessing you know who did it." Hanley nodded. "Karen Thompson. She used to burn her laptop to access the HOA's system through a VPN. Then she sent out an anonymous complaint to the sheriff's office, claiming you'd tampered with HOA finances to cover for your own misconduct. Her goal was to make sure your badge worked against you." My jaw tightened. "She's gone all in, hasn't she?" Hanley looked me dead in the eye. "Oh, it gets worse. We have evidence she's been blackmailing another HOA member, Rick. Turns out he wasn't helping you out of goodwill. She had something on him. He's been feeding her updates about the investigation." That explained the strange behavior, the nervous texts, the hesitation. Rick had been a pawn, too. Hanley gathered her papers. "We're moving tonight. She's holed up in her sister's vacation house about 40 miles north. Rionur wants you there, strictly as an observer." I hesitated. "Observer." She smiled faintly. "You've earned that much, Deputy." The drive up was tense. The convoy of county vehicles moved silently through winding forest roads, headlights cutting through the fog. The air smelled of pine and damp soil, and the sound of gravel crunching under the tires filled the silence. When we reached the cabin, it was almost dark. Rionur briefed the team quickly. "We've confirmed she's inside. Laptop, still active. No civilians nearby. We go quiet, we go clean." The agents moved in with precision. I stayed back watching through the dim trees. Then, in one fluid motion, they breached the door. "County Sheriff's Office, federal warrant." The night exploded with shouts. A crash, then the sound of running feet. Moments later, 2 agents emerged, pulling Karen out in handcuffs. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale but defiant. Even then, she tried to act like she was the one in control. When she saw me standing by the patrol truck, her eyes went wide. "You," she hissed, "you think you've won? You think this makes you clean?" I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Hanley stepped forward, reading her rights as Rionur pulled up beside me. She had backup drives, forged documents, even fake statements under your name, he said quietly. If you hadn't called when you did, she might have buried you under it. I exhaled slowly, finally feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. The next week, the entire neighborhood buzzed with the news. Karen's arrest made the local headlines. Words like embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction flashed across the screen. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to restructure leadership. And this time, when they asked me to join, I didn't hesitate. Standing at the podium, I looked out at the same faces that once glared at me for parking my truck in my own driveway. Now they watched in silence, waiting for me to speak. I didn't move here to fight with anyone, I said. I came here to live like everyone else, peacefully. But peace only lasts when we hold people accountable, no matter their title or position. I think this neighborhood deserves that kind of honesty. The room erupted in quiet applause. For the first time, it didn't feel like a battle, it felt like closure. After the meeting, as the sun dipped low over Maple Glen, I walked to my truck. The same driveway where this all began. I stood there for a moment, listening to the crickets, feeling that strange mix of exhaustion and relief. A voice came from behind me. It was Rioneur. "So, deputy," he said with a smirk, "think you'll get written up again for parking here?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. "If I do, I'll issue the ticket myself." He chuckled and nodded. "You earned that right." As he drove off, I leaned against my truck, watching the last light fade. For once, Maple Glen felt calm, not because the rules changed, but because truth finally came to light. And somewhere deep down, I knew one thing for certain. In this town, justice didn't wear a suit or hide behind HOA bylaws. Sometimes it parked right in the driveway. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.